Hey, this is Brooks from BrooksBrownCoaching.com, and in this video, I'm going to be discussing porn and how it can affect your brain, your body, your behavior, and maybe your relationships. So there's not going to be any graphic video in this video, and there's not going to be any detailed graphic discussion of pornography or sex acts, but I will be discussing porn and the activities that typically revolve around it. So if that's something you're not comfortable with, or there are people in the room that you don't want to hear that, then it'd be a good time to click away. So I think this conversation is becoming more popular. I've seen more people talking about it on the internet, and I think that's important. Porn has been around for a long time, but it is more accessible than it ever has been. And, more accessible to a wider age range. There are less barriers to entry than there ever have been. So years ago, somebody might have to go to, kind of a sketchy bookstore or something like that to find pornographic images, and they weren't as prevalent as they are now. But a large website that is one of the top purveyors of pornography on the internet releases statistics every year. And it was interesting to see that 86% of their viewership in 2022 came from smartphones. So it's not even people, the days of renting a movie or a magazine or whatever, that's gone. It's just in everybody's pocket. And with it being something that's so enticing, dropping even more barriers to entry, I think makes it, I'm reluctant to say dangerous, but it makes it so much more accessible to people that may abuse it. So, I just kind of want to talk about what's going on when you are watching porn or, engaging again in those activities that revolve around it. So in the United States, we actually took first place. We were the highest porn viewership in the world, and by a pretty large margin, followed well behind by the United Kingdom. So it is a very American phenomenon, and it's viewed all over the world, but it is something that we are dealing with more than most places. So, something you might not know watching this, I do speaking at a lot of schools, and one of the classes that we talk about is social media. And typically in that social media conversation, there's discussion of pornography because I deal with a lot of young people, young guys in particular, that have access to this stuff. And, I've talked to plenty that have had issues with it. So, and it's not relegated to teenagers. The highest viewership is between the ages of 18 and 34. And so we just want to kind of get out there. What's going on? How innocuous is this really? Or what are the genuine effects it's having? So just kind of some, real basic stuff here. Obviously, porn is hijacking that part of your brain, one of the most central parts of your brain, to tell you to procreate. That is so key to being any living animal for the most part. We all have this intense drive to find a mate and procreate, which makes something like this so attractive. So this is hijacking a part of your brain that is not equipped to understand that what you're viewing is not real and that it's not you engaged in the act. Because of that, your brain and your body goes through similar processes as it would if you were engaging in sex. One of those things being rewarding you for a completion of a sex act, meaning typically when people view pornography, they are going to masturbate, and that will result in an orgasm, and then that will result in an increase of a few chemicals in the brain and decrease in some other chemicals. Those chemicals being one, first and foremost, during that process, there's a big increase in dopamine. And dopamine serves to tell you to continue doing whatever action it is you're doing. So, hunting, for instance, is deeply ingrained. Finding food has a real deep dopamine path because your body tells you, this payoff is very important. So it rewards you with dopamine to make sure you continue to do that act. Same thing with sex. You continuing to propagate your genes to have children is very important. And so your body rewards you for that process. Your body doesn't understand that what you're viewing is on a phone and not in front of you. And so when people go through that process, they are rewarded. The thing is, dopamine, a lot of people think of it as this reward chemical, and people say, oh, it's the same chemical that's released when you do drugs. And that is true. And the reason that typically drugs become less and less rewarding is because that dopamine response becomes less and less fulfilling every time. You get a little less dopamine every time you repeat the same action. Same goes for viewing pornography. So when people view pornography and then masturbate, the resulting dopamine response is lower typically than it was before, given the same stimuli. So that stimuli has to be increased, which means either viewing for a longer duration or viewing more exciting material, which might mean more aggressive or more exotic or whatever. And so the propensity to escalate is there for people that, do not have this type of discipline. Another chemical that's being released in your body is oxytocin after orgasm. That pushes those dopamine levels down, and oxytocin results in this process because what that typically would do would make you feel a connection to your mate. So the person that you have just had sex with, after completion of orgasm, now you feel, a drive to be close to that person. That's what oxytocin does. Well, you still have that response even if you're viewing pornography. So that is released and it's making you feel love, or should make you feel connection to whatever is around you. Typically, there's not going to be a partner there for that. It does release some serotonin and drop cortisol levels. So this is one reason that it's thought that people who are experiencing depression could have a propensity for addiction to pornography and masturbation, because it can temporarily decrease the symptoms of anxiety and depression. So there's been studies shown that we don't really understand which way the correlation goes. There's been studies that show people that view pornography more have a higher prevalence of depression, but it's not known whether that depression persisted before the viewership of pornography, and the viewing of pornography is a way for a depressed person to deal with that depression, or if the viewing the pornography is what causes the depression. It's hard to say, but we do know there is a link there. So something to be mindful of. Additionally, a lot of people that are experiencing depression, if you get online and look for kind of natural remedies, a lot of people will suggest refraining from masturbation and pornography. And that typically does seem to show some improvement in symptoms of depression, which I think is pretty interesting. So it's not known. I mean, obviously the chemical component is important there, but also if there's a sense of self-efficacy that is increased, or a sense of self-discipline that's increased. So, those are really important chemical factors to be aware of, but we also want to be mindful of that dopamine process. What that's doing is helping you learn the way to achieve something. And so someone that's viewing pornography is learning that they're learning something, whether that is, this is how sex works, this is how relationships work, this is how a connection between men and women works, whatever it is, that is being ingrained. Whether you know better, whatever, you're an adult that knows better than that, or you're a kid who's never had a sexual experience, never had any relationship experience, and this is the way they're learning. So when that dopamine level has to be increased every time, for people that are in the dating world and they're seeking a mate and find someone, there is a lot of ways that this viewing pornography and going through this process of viewing this material, maybe escalating material, and then masturbating and getting that dopamine hit and reinforcing that, there's a lot of ways that can really negatively impact your relationships and your dating potential. One, if you're learning that process and people start to believe that this is how you treat people in a relationship, that is typically not going to work out well. If you have told your brain that the whole point of the relationship, because this is what you see in pornography, it's fantasy, it's not real, obviously, that's the point. And it typically ends when, there is an orgasm. And if people start to ingrain in their brain that the goal of an interaction between a man and a woman is an orgasm and then it's done, people are more likely to do things that only go to achieve that end. So not seeing sexual intimacy as a part of a healthy relationship, but as it being the end point. So anything that has to be done to achieve that goal is warranted, because that path is created in the brain that what we want is to get there, to get this dopamine response, which could lead things to like manipulation, dishonesty, just for the goal of, getting laid. that can be super destructive. Additionally, that really ramping response for someone who is in a relationship that wants to have a healthy sexual relationship with a partner, now regular intimate contact with a person is not enough because the things that they've been viewing have escalated and escalated and escalated. And so now the idea of having a normal sexual relationship with a single partner is not exciting enough to maybe even allow that person to, guys, I mean, the same can be said for women, but, I'm speaking on behalf of men here because I am one. It could make it more difficult for men to achieve arousal, much less completion. Now, if you have that issue, barring other health effects, and, I've talked a lot about those on those channels, things that could be going on that might cause things like erectile dysfunction. But if this is something that's self-imposed by viewing tons and tons of escalating, more exotic, more erotic, intense pornography, well, now we got a brain chemistry issue. We got this dopamine response issue that you got to figure out how to walk back. And if this is a monogamous relationship, someone you've been with long term, and all of a sudden there's a perceived sense of, this lack of interest, that's going to be really detrimental, one, to your partner's well-being, their sense of, really their idea of whether or not they're attractive to you, which could damage your relationship in a bunch of other ways. Not knowing that it's not them, it's you. You've got it addicted to something that you can't get a handle on now. And so now you can't achieve this arousal with your partner. But it can also, for younger guys that, if this is their first experience, this is their education, sexual education is coming from pornography on their phone, the way they view women and they view relationships could be very damaged. And so the way that they interact in sexual, intimate relationships for maybe the first time could be potentially dangerous, not understanding that what they see on the phone is not real life. There have been plenty of accounts of men being way more sexually aggressive because of things they have seen in pornography, and they equate that to normalcy because they don't have any other experience. That's really scary. And having young guys that don't, I guess you could say, don't know any better. I mean, I would say a lot of men for a long time now, their first exposure to, the female form or to sex was probably some level of pornographic material. And I'm not saying watching hardcore pornography, maybe it was seeing, a Sports Illustrated or something. And I'm not calling that porn, but I'm just saying it was some material they were viewing, whether that was a magazine or it was a book or, a Playboy they found under the parents' bed or whatever. But it wasn't intense, graphic, hardcore porn, which is so easy for them to access now. So, that type of sex education is scary for everybody involved. And, it's not just that we have to worry about what those guys go out and do. We got to worry about them too. Like, this is a crazy world for them to be growing up in. If we're letting their brain develop in that environment, it's not good for them. There will be a lot of maintenance that will have to be done, a lot of walking back for them to be able to have healthy sexual relationships. So, what else can be said about this? So, another way this is really going to affect social interactions, one, a lot of guys will just, maybe guys that are not very confident, will just resort to this versus actually pursuing relationships with, a partner of the opposite sex. Because why would they? If they don't feel confident, but they can get similar stimulation, they can see anything they want on their phone and then masturbate and achieve this, what their brain perceives as the goal, they might be more reluctant to actually go out and socialize and try to find a mate. Additionally, this habit of regularly watching pornography and masturbating decreases testosterone levels, or at least doesn't let them peak. So there was a study done with 28 men where they had these guys abstain from ejaculation, whether that was masturbation or sex, for 7 days. And on the 7th day, I'll show you the study here, there was a massive increase in testosterone, about 45%. So we can see there on day 7, we get a jump. We start to see the jump on day 6, really most significant. And then on 7, we have a huge spike. Now, what you see here, we have group 1. These guys were allowed to ejaculate, and then they refrained again for another 7 days. We see that spike again on the 7th days. Group 2 over here, they continued to abstain from ejaculation for another 8 days. What we can see is their testosterone levels went back down to baseline and then maintained, and did that for the foreseeable future. So what did have to take place to get this 7-day spike was abstain for 7 days, and then there was, an orgasm, testosterone levels went down, and then in 7 days it would go back up again. That's probably because your highest concentration of sperm and the process of spermatogenesis, so creating sperm, is at its peak around 6 to 7 days, and your body's going to hit you with this testosterone spike to really drive you to find a mate. Additionally, what happens when that testosterone levels goes up, it increases sexual drive, increases libido, but it also increases confidence. It also increases your perceived attractiveness to females. So women tend to find men with higher levels of testosterone more attractive, more physically attractive. And I'm not saying that, you can't be in a long-term relationship and a guy with hypogonadism, that has, for some reason, his testosterone levels have dropped, that the person he's with just isn't going to be attracted to him anymore. That's a totally different thing. But this drive, meeting a new person and them having this perception of attraction to you is greatly affected by testosterone. Just the fact. Those studies have been done. Additionally, release of things like pheromones are increased with your testosterone levels. So women even perceiving you, not just visually, but subconsciously, they're smelling you. All of that stuff is increased. So this idea, this chance to find a mate is all increased by refraining from pornography and regular masturbation. So that's another component of how this could really affect your relationships and your dating life. And 2, there's other chemicals that tend to make people just lazy. Prolactin levels really decrease your energy levels that are released after orgasm. And so all this stuff, it just leads to a group of people that are much more docile. Doesn't necessarily sound bad, but almost neutered. You have a bigger group of guys now, and testosterone levels over years now, decades now, have been decreasing. And there are probably a lot of other factors in that, but you now have a group of men that are just much more docile in a lot of ways. And, they're not learning what it takes to find a mate because they don't have to go through the process anymore. They just look on their phone. And, their brain is registering. It's not exactly the same thing, but for a lot of people, it's close enough because it doesn't involve potentially going out and having to learn to talk to people and potentially being rejected. And then, the embarrassment of that or whatever. Used to, if you wanted to have sex, you had to learn how to hone those skills. You had to learn how to be social. You had to learn how to meet people and, engage in these things and have a healthy relationship and foster a level of attraction where a female would be interested in being intimate with you. That isn't happening as much anymore. And I think there's a lot to be said for, what's happened with porn culture now as far as an over-acceptance of, just every regular Joe woman now having some level of OnlyFans, or the things that are seeing this stimulation that's happening all the time by people looking on things like Instagram. There's, the level of nearly nude women around all the time is super stimulating for men, and then they kind of don't know what to do with this energy. And so I'm definitely not giving guys a pass for any misbehavior, but I think for young men that definitely don't have the impulse control, that, and there's definitely older men that don't have it either, but it's really, really tough for these young guys that have so much access and they don't understand what it's doing in their brain, especially a developing brain. It's really hijacking some neural pathways here. So be really, really careful with this stuff. My recommendation would be abstain. Stay away from it. There's nothing good about it. Porn has been used as a weapon all over the world. And, I think there's something to be said for that. And you can go down the conspiracy rabbit hole here, but it's one of the biggest industries in the country, and it's free. It's just given to you. So I think it's intentionally disruptive. I think it keeps a lot of people docile. I think it's damaged masculinity as a whole in this country for sure, but countries all over the world. And I think it's really damaged manhood. I think a lot of men have been, again, like I said, they've been kind of neutered by it. So, think about what you're sacrificing by viewing this stuff. Not to mention the repercussions of the people that are involved in the industry. I mean, a lot of it is essentially a legalized sex trade. I mean, there's a lot of sex trafficking that goes on around it. So, just be mindful and know that viewing this stuff is not harmless, and that it is having effects on your brain. It can have effects on your behavior, and it's just something to be aware of. And, taking some time to get away from that and resetting some of these dopamine receptors and resetting some of these processes in your brain to maybe become more healthy, and realizing, do you potentially have an issue with addiction to this? If you do, there's a lot of places now where you can seek help. You can get treatment. So, I don't know. It's just something to think about. If you have any comments, you have any thoughts on this, please let me know. If you haven't already, I would love for you to subscribe, as I keep making videos about, how you can take control of your health, and, not just health, but behavioral stuff as well. And just overall, my line on my website on BrooksBrownCoaching.com is let's create a life that you're proud of. And so that's what I'm hoping I'm helping do that here. So thank you for watching, and hope to talk to you again soon.